Hello everyone and welcome back to MixBest TV mixing and mastering tutorials on YouTube. I'm your host David, and if there's something I'd like you to walk away from this video with is don't use a compressor when you need a limiter. So today we are talking about the differences between limiter and compressor. And also I want to dig a bit deeper in what seems to confuse many newbies, the compressor attack, specifically slow attack settings. This might be a little too basic for the more advanced guys, but we have a lot of new subscribers and I wanted to touch on this because it is something that seems to confuse many of the less experienced people. So first of all, welcome to the many new subscribers we have. Thank you guys for spreading the word about the channels, sharing, liking, and commenting. Please keep doing that. Now let's get to the subject. Don't use a compressor when you need a limiter. Don't try to use a compressor to do the work of a limiter. That is not only not gonna work, but will leave the less experienced guys confused about compression and specifically about the attack settings. Okay, so when I say limiter in the context of this video, I mean brick wall limiters, like an L1, L2. I want to specify this since a lot of compressors like the 1176 are labeled as limiters, but that's not what I mean here. By limiters, I mean digital brick wall limiters. So what's the difference between a compressor and a limiter and when to use one or the other? The differences are many, but at least the most important ones. First, a limiter has zero attack time. Zero. A compressor has an attack time. No matter how short, no matter how fast, it has an attack time. So this brings us to the first important point. If what you want to do is to reduce the peak level of your audio without changing the envelope, you need a limiter. That's it. It's that easy. That's what you use a limiter for. That's what they were created for. To not let any part of the audio exceeding the threshold and to do it in the most transparent way possible. All the other tasks, all the other situations in which you wish to change the dynamic, the envelope of your audio belong to the other dynamic processors, compressors, de-essers, gates, and so on. So once you have this premise, it's easy to understand when you want to use a limiter instead of a compressor. You want to reduce the peak of your audio in a transparent way without any part of the transient pass, use a limiter. Don't want that, you want to enhance the attack, making it snappier, bring up the sustain, add color, make the track bounce, use a compressor. I'm making this very simple. There will be many more situations to take into account when deciding, but I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. So not only the brick wall limiter has zero attack, but it has a fixed infinite ratio, and it goes to 0 to 11 instantaneously. It's so fast that we don't perceive any change in the envelope of the transient, except for the transient being attenuated, dulled a bit, depending on the limiter you use, and if you go too far, you also get distortion, of course. But some even use special algorithms to deal with the dulling of the transient to avoid that side effect. And they work if you don't go too far. A compressor, on the other hand, has a curve to follow. According to what? According to topology, attack settings, whether or not the compressor has variable program-depending attack and behavior, a curve to go from 0 to whatever gain reduction. And we perceive that. That's part of what we call the sound of compression. And what's the problem with trying to use a compressor to do the work of a limiter? Well, it's that attack time. If you try to use a compressor when you need a limiter, so to tame the peaks, this is how you end up. Most likely you set the attack as fast as possible. But here lies the rub. You still have an attack time. You still have a curve. But here's where some confusion starts. When we describe a compressor controls, we say the attack is the time the compressor takes to start compressing the material after the signal exceeds the threshold. That's not correct in reality. We say that to simplify things as a habit. The truth is the compressor starts compressing immediately. Let's say we have a 10 milliseconds attack. 10 milliseconds is the time the compressor takes to reach the full ratio, to reach the full gain reduction. But it starts immediately. So if we set the attack time fast enough, we are able to stop that peak because the compressor starts compressing right away, immediately, when the signal exceeds the threshold. With fast attack settings, the curve is so fast that we don't perceive any part of the transient passing, but the result is the material sound choked. Let's hear an example of this. Let's try this on the whole drum bus. The differences are going to be much more apparent with the super fast settings on these compressors meant to emulate what a limiter does. So super fast attack, fast release, ratio infinity. The artifacts are going to be so obvious. And let's hear the drums without anything. With the limiter. With the stock Pro Tools compressor. With the API. So you hear with the limiter, the sound doesn't change that much. Like I said before, is a little more splatty. The transient is squashed a bit, is dulled a bit, but with the stock compressor, there's distortion happening. There's artifacts. It takes away a lot and it starts to sound hazy. With the API, the action of the compressor, because it's a very character color compressor, it's even more obvious in the envelope, in its action. Okay, and that's because, unless you go for that super compressed sound, that's not really what a compressor is meant to do. It's not meant to do the work of a limiter. And that's pretty much the whole point of the video. Brickwood limiters are okay to be used in mixing. And I know this will sound very basic to most of you, but you wouldn't believe how many people are scared to use limiters in mixing because the internet told them that you don't use limiters for mixing. Limiters are only used to catch occasional peaks and only in mastering. And that's bullshit. They were originally designed to do that, but modern mixing make them a very common tool that is used across many tracks in today's mixing, sometimes even not so subtly. So don't be afraid when you need a limiter, use a limiter. Now, this takes us to the other part that confuses some people, slow attack on compressors. Why should I use a slow attack on compressor? You use a slow attack for many reasons. On percussive material like kick and snare, you use slow attack to enhance the attack, to make things punchier. How? By contrast. Even if you don't use makeup gain, you let the transient pass while reducing what comes next, the sustain. And with slow attack times, especially on percussive material, you don't need to match the makeup gain to the gain reduction necessarily, the advice that you usually see around, because part of the transient is passing. So if you match, let's say, 6 dB of gain reduction with 6 dB of makeup gain, and you do it trying to compare with and without compression at the same level, you're not really doing that because the initial part of the transient is passing with a slow attack. So you're going to perceive the compressed audio louder than the non-compressed audio when comparing because it is actually louder. You will need to compensate a bit still because what we said before about the compressor starting to apply gain reduction immediately, but not matching dB by dB. We can do that. We don't need to because we already created contrast between the initial part of the transient and the sustain. Now our brain perceives the material as being more punchy already. So let's hear what the slow attack does to the snare and how we can create that contrast by using a slow attack on a snare. Let's put it in U. It's more obvious. And we keep the knee hard. Attack a 10. little less ratio. Let's compensate a bit. Okay. Now, even if we don't compensate for all the, how many? Almost 12 dB of compression, of gain reduction, I'm compensating just about 3 dB now. And we can hear the contrast already. The initial part of the transient passes and making the snare more snappy. If we go 30 milliseconds, okay, as opposed to attack all the way down. But that's just an example. We also use slow attack settings on vocals, bass, guitar, synths to make the action of the compressor less aggressive, more natural, and to let the element we are compressing not sounding choked. Obviously, the opposite is true. We use a fast attack when we want the element to be squeezed, to be sitting back, to tame wild dynamics and peaks. But the difference in this case is we do want to hear compression. We want to hear that sound. With the limiter, you don't have that, or better, you have the limiter sound if you push it hard enough. But it's totally different than the sound of the compression. There's the whole curve, the envelope, that is not in the limiter. Remember, a limiter only affects the sound when it's working and only on the part that is processing, in this case, the peaks. A compressor affects everything all the time, and even not considering color. Release has also a curve. And depending on topology, different compressor can sound very different at the same settings, at the same release settings. Sound and behave very differently. In fact, on some compressors, you see the option for logarithmic release and linear, and also many compressors have a variable release and or a program-dependent release that changes as the material changes. All these variables give you different sounds, different envelopes, and change the sound of the material somehow. A limiter, we can say it doesn't, or at least it tries not to. It tries to be completely transparent, while a compressor, even if it's meant to be transparent, by nature changes the envelope. That's what it's meant to do. A limiter is very easy and straightforward. It does one thing, it has one sound and 0 variables. It reduces the nominal level of peaks as transparently as possible. That's it. And since we talked about release, many people might not be aware of this, but one of the main differences between FET and opto compressors is the release curve. Let me show you this. Waves did a great job with their R compressor in capturing the different behavior of the release between opto and FET. They call it electro. In electro mode, as the gain reduction approaches 0, it gets faster. In opto mode, as the gain reduction approaches 0, it stomps on the brakes, we say, so it gets slower. Let me show you that. Look at the gain reduction meter. Now look in opto. You see? So at the same release settings, the FET, electro mode, it goes faster as it approaches 0. In opto mode, stomps on the brake. Start fast, it gets slower. Now I put the release very slow so you can hear the difference, but yeah. You see? And again, With the limiter, you don't have all these variables. But I'm digressing. The point is, limiter don't have all these variables that change the envelope. They meant to be transparent. Now, on a related subject to this low attack on compressors, many newbies run into the following problem when they try to use a compressor to make their drum snappier by using a slow attack. They set the attack, let's say at 10 milliseconds. They like the sound. They want more of it, so they either use a makeup gain or the fader to boost the sound that is now snappy cool. What happens? They clip. Oh, but if I lower the level, I can't hear the snare. The music is too loud. And this is a very easy fix. Lower everything else. Your gain staging is shit. That's why it's important to have your gain staging right. That's why it's important not to care about the level, loudness of your mix. If you start your mix with everything close to red, obviously when you try to boost something, you will clip. You should be able to boost a lot of things by a large margin and not to clip. That's why you need a correct gain staging and a lot of headroom when you start mixing. But yeah, it's that simple. You have one element that is not loud enough and you cannot boost it because it clips. Everything else in your mix is too loud. That's it. It's that simple. And I know, again, this is going to be very basic for most of you guys. But, here and there, I think it's fair to take a break from all the advanced stuff we usually do and cover some basics. I hope you guys don't mind that. So this is pretty much it. Know your tools and know that everything in mixes is interconnected. You have your gain staging wrong, it's going to be hard to use your dynamic processor correctly. You have your gain staging wrong, it's going to be hard to use your saturators correctly. Use the wrong tool to do something and everything else will become an uphill battle. And that's a wrap. This is it for this video. I hope it was informative and I hope you liked it. If you did, please don't forget to click the like button and share it around. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment down below. Join us on Facebook and Twitter to stay in touch with us and get all the news about the channel, upcoming videos and series, and access to exclusive content. Make sure you check out the Facebook page specifically because we are posting featured mix. When we upload new mixes on the SoundCloud page, we notify that on Twitter and Facebook specifically, so you can listen to the mixes. And if you hear something you like, you want to know something about that mix, an effect or whatever else, leave us a comment and we'll get to that. Please keep supporting MixBuzz TV by sharing the videos and spreading the word on blogs, forums, social media. Subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.